Thank you. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the best hidden secret of CPDP. So thanks for your commitment to the topic and for taking the effort to find where we're located. So my name is Irene Camara. I'm assistant professor at TILT, the Tilburg Institute for Law, Technology and Society in the Netherlands. And today I will be the moderator and I'm also the organizer of this panel. So I'm very excited for this great lineup of speakers that we have. We're still missing one speaker. She's on the way of finding this location. But hopefully she will join us soon. So the topic of the panel today is cyberviolence, vulnerability, and the challenges of AI. And I'm sure some of you have already watched this series, Adolescence, that was released on this popular streaming platform. Back at the day, I realized that quite some people were quite shocked after watching the series. So the double meaning of emojis, online violence, and how you can relate to physical violence, cyberbullying among teenagers. And media outlets were writing about the disturbing truth and sad reality behind the drama series. But all these reactions, they made me wonder, is this really how uninformed the average parent or internet user is about what is happening online? Do we have to wait for this drama series to alert us and educate us on what is happening? Because cyberviolence is certainly not a new phenomenon. However, there are some elements that are new. The subculture of propagating harm online against strangers, and specifically more often women and girls, and the accessibility to sophisticated tools, which may create, for example, a synthetic nude image of someone in seconds. So cyberviolence as a concept includes behaviors that range from online child sexual abuse to cyberbullying to cyber harassment and cyber stalking. So today we will discuss this phenomenon of cyberviolence, shedding light particularly on the role of technology and AI in specific, vulnerability, but also responses to cyberviolence. I should say that this panel is funded by a grant that was awarded to me by the Tilburg Law School and the Dutch Ministry of Education, and it focuses exactly on the topic of technology-facilitated violence. I would take a minute to also inform you, in case you're not familiar with this, that in the Netherlands things are not going great when it comes to academia and funding. So the Dutch government has passed legislation bringing immense budget cuts on education that deeply affect all the Dutch universities. And for this reason, we are going on strike on the 10th of June because all those changes are threatening the future of academia in the Netherlands, and I'm sure the Netherlands is one of the first to suffer, but not the only one. So now we go back to the topic. I will introduce the panelists today in the order of appearance. So to the left of me, we have Professor Katrin van de Heining, who is a professor at the University of Antwerp, where she teaches fundamental rights. She's also a deputy public prosecutor at the Cybercrime Division in Antwerp, and many other things that, I could spend a lot of time presenting. Then we have Maria Asensio Velasco. He's a human rights lawyer specializing in children's rights, and she serves as a project manager in the Children's Rights Division of the Council of Europe. She's leading the End Online Child Sexual Exploitation and Abuse at Europe Plus project. Then our speaker, who is now missing, is Eivind Insir, who is a member of the European Parliament since 2019 for the Swedish Social Democratic Party. She was lead negotiator for the European Parliament for the EU Directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence. And last but not least, Professor Kim Barker. She's professor of law at Lincoln Law School. She has been a leading member of the independent body monitoring the implementation of the Istanbul Convention at the Council of Europe. And she's lead expert for the Council of Europe's Committee of Experts on Combating Technology-Facilitated Violence Against Women. So I could not ask for a better lineup of speakers. I'm very excited to have you all here. Thank you for accepting the invitation. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to have short interventions of around 10 to 12 minutes from the panelists. And then we're going to have a nice dialogue, questions from you. If you want to ask a question, you can come here to the microphone because the session is being recorded. And yeah, so let's start with Catherine.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for the opportunity to speak. It's always nice to sit here next to you, Irene. I already cautioned you. I'm also going to do a little bit of advertisement. I'm also writing a report for the United Nations Human Rights Council on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. We're still looking for inputs, so if you just Google technology-facilitated gender-based violence and UN, you'll probably come to our questionnaire. So any input is very welcome. End of the advertisement section, and I can go to my presentation. So I think Irene already introduced my position, but that also is probably important to know what I will be presenting. What I will be presenting comes basically from two strands. One, my expertise as a designated prosecutor on cyber violence, which most of the prosecutions don't have. Our public ministry in Belgium decided also that one prosecutor should have this experience and knowledge, etc., on cyber violence. And so I will be also, guiding colleagues on how to prosecute this kind of crimes. But that also makes, of course, that I have this influx of all these cases and the new issues that really, have such a huge impact on not just our young people, really everyone. Because, and you made this reference to adolescence, and that has also been, that's the focal topic where we're working on, or that population of the 15 to 25 years old and even younger. But, from my expertise, it's very clear that these impacts just, we are eldest victims of what we call cyber violence. They are really like 86, 87. I think the 87 was our oldest victim. So you really see it's like these board games where you say like from 0 to 99. That's really where cyber violence impacts. And the other, input is of course from our research. So we've done multidisciplinary research on several of these topics of cyber violence, hate speech, non-consensual intimate images, the impact of online porn platforming, deep nudes, and dick pics. Really across the board, we've done this research, and there you really also see the huge impact. So I'm going to take you a little bit along the way with also this focus on AI in my presentation. Because, of course, this kind of violence, whether it be gender-based or whether it is harassment, bullying, etc., obviously, these kind of violence were already there in the physical world. What the digital part did was amplify it, and what AI is doing is turbocharging that. So we need to think about the structural and systemic issues in society, which is obviously the patriarchy and how that impacts on gender-based, but also other kinds of vulnerabilities. We see, for example, that children who are already in a socio-economic vulnerable position also will more feel the violence that is coming from online, obviously because there's less parental control, less parental guidance. And so it really, vulnerability is again this factor, just as AI, that is turbocharging cyber violence. So AI as a new challenge, and this is one that I took from I love that quote. It's a quote from a report of colleagues of University College of London. And, smartphones where we live today, it tells you a lot about, it's not just, it is really true for young people, but it's true for other generations as well, how we perceive the world, how we communicate, but also where, and that's maybe from a privacy perspective, where our most intimate information, it's really on that smartphone. And of course, that makes us also very vulnerable. And the more we're dependent on that smartphone, the more we're also open for potentials of cyber violence. And so everyone at one point will have some impact of cyber violence. But if you have already this very, you're well connected and you're a strong person, obviously you won't feel it to the same extent than those people who have these personal or group characteristics because of which it is amplified. And what AI is doing, and I think that is, from all the research taking out what AI is doing as a negative impact, is amplifying and increasing either your strength or your weaknesses. And that means if you're vulnerable because of algorithms, because of how AI learns how you are and what triggers you, what makes you going, what makes you down, what makes you spending more time on that smartphone, that is what AI is doing. And so if you're already in this vulnerable position, AI will, instead of, just protecting you, the AI that we see now today on platforms, on gaming, because it's not just, all the focus on platforms, but gaming is also a really, issue of concern for us. They will see that AI will, put you already more in that path to destruction than because of algorithms and because of learning curves that is already out there. I'm going to give you a few examples. Obviously, I can't talk about ongoing cases I am dealing with, but this is something we see a lot. So in our CSAM cases, we obviously, as Belgium, but also as all, most of the countries, we are teaching children to be safer online. So we have media literacy, we have sexual education. Also, platforms are doing more to keep predators away. But what we learn our children is not working anymore. So, for example, we have this game, OK Boomer, and it teaches children to see who is potentially, a groomer. For example, what we were mentioning was like, look how they talk to you. Would a child talk to you like this? Or ask them to put on a camera, so you will see that this is an elderly person. But then, of course, we have seen our first cases where AI was used and the camera is on and they see a child. It's not a child, but it's the AI-created deepfake of this person who is being behind. Another one is AI vocabulary. So you can put on when you're texting with someone, the AI will learn how the other one is communicating and taking over that language. That's very nice because if I'm talking with someone in Japan, I can directly talk with him in Japanese while I'm just speaking English. But that also works with slang. So we've seen in a sextortion case, a person from Ghana who was clearly in his 40s, or turned out to be in his 40s, talking to a young child in Antwerp, in the Antwerp dialect. So that, makes it even more difficult for us as to prevention, how to deal with that. And this, of course, is very problematic that we see that ever more of this, image-based abuse is also AI triggered. And there is this perception, but if all child sexual abuse images would be AI created, that's better, right? Because then a child is not abused. But actually we see that that's not what's happening. It's just like there will still be this demand for real child sexual abuse material, but what we are seeing is as well that real images are just, further generated with AI, that, it makes it more perfect. It makes it more gross to my perspective. But you do see that, that there is this increase as well of AI images, and instead of, making that there are less children abused, it just increases demand also for the real stuff that is being created. Also, AI needs to train on images, meaning that all these images are coming in these vast databases of system material that trains AI, which obviously is very disturbing. I think everyone in this room already knows what deep nude is. So we did a research, 3,000 young people 50-50 gendered, 10% LGBTQI+. And we also made a division as to minorities and non-minorities, socioeconomic, but also culturally, to deep nude. And I mean, for us, that was quite disturbing because we found out that in the end, 8%, and that was non-gendered, and if you would make it boys, it would go up, already made deep nude images, which was a research we've done 2 years ago. So imagine what that is now, and what we are seeing as well, in particular in schools, how these deep nude images are transforming really what is happening in schools, how children are being really harassed by these kind of images, but how you can simply find these apps online. I mean, if you Google, you will find these kind of apps. And where I think that the European Union, I mean, is such an important partner, what it did with the Digital Services Act as to the ability to remove content, to put responsibility on platforms, it's such a massive, important part of legislation. And the same will be true for the directive on gender-based violence and domestic violence. Yet, as long as this kind of apps are simply with one Google click to be found, and they're not criminalized. Also, if you look to the AI Act, I mean, this is considered under the AI Act just moderate risk, right? That is not a big risk, because deepfake was considered not a big risk. Well, we are seeing what extreme harm it is doing. We have tons of cases of young people being extorted with this kind of deep nude images. And I will tell you what these young people do. They self-harm, that's one. And if they can, they pay. They pay, even though they know it's not a real image, because they know what the real impact is in classes. We have a case, and this one I can't talk about because it's already finalized, but we have a case in a school where the children made these deep nude images of their teachers. And it's so much, and it were the boys, it so much undermined their position as teachers that they said, I'm not capable anymore of teaching. And all the women who were, all the teachers, female teachers who were targeted by this, they just, I mean, they quit education. That is what it's doing to us. This is adolescence, but in real life. So, and that is, yeah, that's the next step. That's virtual reality. Porn industry is now experimenting with deepfake porn really on your Googles. So take these deep nude apps where you can make these images and these movies from your colleague, your neighbor, your classmate, and add that to this VR reality, and someone can simply have a real sexual, you know, complete VR experience with you, and imagine what that will do in real life as to harassment. So, and I mean, this is technology, and just out there, it's just being done by legit companies, and it's completely legal, which makes it, of course, very problematic. This is just some of the research, yeah, that's some of the research that we have been doing and what the impact is on youngsters. And of course, I have too many slides because I'm too passionate about it, but maybe just to finalize as to the how to respond, because that is, you know, the legal part, and where as Europe we can really change something. And I was really disturbed by the AI Act on that perspective, because we know that the vast majority of deepfake we're seeing today is being used in deep nuding, in this kind of scams, etc. What the politicians were thinking about was this kind of, yeah, you know, all these movies with, or this content with a Barack Obama that's saying something new, or Trump playing the drums, or whatever, you know, that was, how could it distort democracy? But we see it in the real cases that is really triggered much more for cyber violence. And so this is what I've taken from the AI Act, that, you know, we need to have, yeah, regulation on deepfake, but let's make sure it does not hamper the display or enjoyment of the work. You can see how that, for me, that is very cynical if I'm seeing what is happening online. So we need, we need a response, of course, and you see all the things I think that should happen, but change the law is an essential one. And I think we need to regulate on these, need to regulate further on these AI apps that can do so much harm from a cyber violence perspective. So AI Act first step, not the definitive step, a first step, and I think cyber violence shows you how we need even more regulation and more responsibility from the tech sector. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. There's certainly a lot to discuss, so we keep this for the Q&A. We can go always back to this slide with the solutions. So I would like to give the floor now to Maria, and in the meantime, welcome Evin. So thanks very much for joining. So Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Irene, and thank you, Catherine, for having, set the tone for the morning. I think it was very useful to listen to all what is happening in cyber violence, and it gave me a lot of, hooks that I can take in terms of CSAM, sexual extortion against children, etc. So I will be speaking, I will be focusing on child sexual exploitation and sexual abuse from the side of the Council of Europe. So firstly, I just wanted to briefly introduce the Lanzarote Convention, which is the Convention on the Protection of Children Against Sexual Exploitation and Sexual Abuse, and it is the most holistic international treaty on this issue. It has already been ratified by 48 state parties, but it's open to accession to any country in the world. So the Lanzarote Convention requires states to criminalize all types of child sexual abuse, whatever the means used to commit the offense. And of course, this includes crimes committed online, such as child sexual abuse material, solicitation or grooming, sexual extortion, abuse of child self-generated materials that have been generated by children themselves, exploitation through live streaming of sexual abuse. And the convention takes a holistic approach that also places a big focus on prevention. This is what we also were hearing from Catherine, with the strong view that child sexual exploitation and abuse is preventable. Then we have the Lanzarote Committee, which is the committee of the parties in charge of monitoring the implementation of the convention, and it also interprets how to apply the convention, organizes capacity building, and raises awareness on the topic. So just going more in deep about child sexual exploitation and abuse, we know that it's a constantly evolving phenomenon, and it has greatly changed in the past decades. And the online version of it, OXEA, Online Child Sexual Exploitation and Abuse, is increasing. This has been confirmed by the International Center on Missing and Exploited Children, by UNODC, Europol, etc. And there are a number of reasons why this online version of child sexual exploitation and abuse is increasing. First of all, of course, children are more connected. So they are more present online, what makes them more vulnerable. But also there are more potential offenders online, and they have more opportunities to offend, given that there are new technologically sophisticated ways of offending without being detected. So also with new technologies, AI, there are many challenges for governments, policymakers, law enforcement, and child protectors. AI-generated child sexual abuse material is growing, but also AI is being used to commit cyberbullying, harassment online, etc. But numbers are also rising because we are getting better at detecting the problem. With hotlines, helplines, members of the public, children and parents report more. And also IT companies have better tools to detect known CSAM. But of course, this has a big impact, and Catherine might be able to tell us about it, on the workload of law enforcement and prosecution and judges. So the Lanzarote Committee has been looking at different issues related to online child sexual exploitation and abuse. It started in 2015 with the grooming opinion on the interpretation of Article 23 of the Convention. And in this opinion, the committee called member states, when they criminalize solicitation of grooming for sexual purposes, to not limit this offense to when there's a meeting that happens offline, in the physical world after the solicitation, but also to criminalize it when the abuse is committed solely, exclusively online. Then in 2017, there was another interpretative opinion on ICTs where the committee affirmed that sexual offenses should be criminalized whatever the means committed, including when they are committed online, even if this is not explicitly affirmed in the convention. Then with the rise of sexting, we started seeing some issues where, because possession of child pornography, quote unquote, as it is called in the convention, is an offense. And we would see children possessing child sexual abuse material of themselves or of others, but that had been received consensually. So the committee was very worried about these trends, and they started working on what we call child sexually suggestive or explicit images and or videos generated, shared, and received by children. So the committee called parties to make sure that children who feature in these self-generated materials are not prosecuted, but rather referred to victim support services. And in terms of possession, it also called on parties to make sure that children who appear in the images that they possess are not prosecuted, but also when they possess images of another child, when they have received these images consensually, or when they have received those images passively without having asked for them. And there's a specific implementation report with recommendations per state party on this issue. And currently there's an ongoing compliance round to map progress made since the implementation report by the state parties. And then we come to 2024, when the committee started working on what we call emerging technologies. We've heard from Catherine that generative AI is, of course, used both to generate completely new synthetic images of child sexual abuse, but also to alter images of a real child, not create deep fakes, and sexualized content. So we have face swap apps that can take the image of a real person, of a child, take the face, and create sexualized content, and also the clothing apps, as we were hearing, which are already being used by classmates to distribute these materials. These images are extremely realistic, so it's very difficult for investigators, for prosecutors to identify whether there's a real child that needs to be rescued. And also in terms of new synthetic images, they also reportedly show the most severe and extreme categories of abuse, so penetrative sexual abuse, bestiality, sadism, etc. These images are also being used to extort children to produce real CSAM by saying, if you don't send me a sex image, then I will distribute this to your contact list, to your family, etc. And also, for children that have already been rescued by law enforcement because they were victims of CSAM, the AI is also being used to re-victimize them by creating new deepfake altered images of these children. So there's a big challenge for criminal justice and for legislators, especially when there's no real evidence of a sexual offense against the child. And we need to ask ourselves many questions in this regard: how to adapt the legislation to evolve with this technology, and how to assess the impact on victims for different offenses. So we have, of course, offline child sexual exploitation and abuse, CSAM obtained through solicitation, child self-generated images that are being misused, and then completely AI-generated CSAM where there is no real child. And we might ask ourselves the question, should the production and distribution of CSAM, where there is a real child but a fictional sexual scenario, be judged less serious offense than CSAM where there is a real child that has been a victim of sexual abuse? And also how to address the situation when the offender is a child. So the Lanzarote Committee addressed this issue in 2024 and adopted a declaration on protecting children against sexual exploitation and sexual abuse facilitated by emerging technologies. And it underlined the specific harm that children suffer when the CSAM is caused by artificially generated and altered images, and also when it is used to coerce, to groom children into producing real CSAM, into engaging into sexual activities, etc. And the committee called its parties to consider criminalizing CSAM facilitated by emerging technologies, including generative AI, and to ensure that sanctions for these offenses committed through ICTs are effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. But the committee also saw the positive side of AI and the potential that it has to actually better protect children, to identify and safeguard the victims, to identify perpetrators, and to detect, investigate, and prosecute these offenses. But the main difficulty that now member states are reporting is how to define in criminal law this CSAM when there is no real child, and what is the basis to prosecute this? Is it obscenity? And does the offender present less of a risk when they possess AI-generated CSAM than real child CSAM, because it's reasonable to assume that an offender that would like to groom a child might use AI-generated CSAM to have a sexual conversation with the child and to normalize sexual activity between adults and children. And then the main question, can we prevent this? Can technical solutions be mandated to prevent these AI apps from generated childlike images? In any case, we see that there's still need for further research and evidence on why AI-generated CSAM is harmful. And just a final note about abuse that happens in virtual reality. The declaration stresses that children that are abused sexually in a virtual and immersive environment are harmed as much as the ones that are abused in the physical world. And they should have access to victim support in the same way as those that are abused offline. And research shows that this is true, and it makes sense because, immersive realities are made for us to feel that it's real. So these children should be afforded the same level of protection, and I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Maria, also for raising this point about the harm that is actually the same, because this is very important, and you hear all kinds of arguments against it, and it's really significant that it's also put in formal opinions or guidelines and documents. So thanks for that. So we will move to our next speaker, Evin. I have already introduced you to to the audience, but I can say again that Evin Insir is a member of the European Parliament and led the, for the European Parliament side, led the initiative on the directive, on the adoption of the directive on gender-based violence. So we're very happy to have you here, and yeah, we're looking forward to hearing.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm sorry I was a bit late in the beginning of this discussion, and I, of course, also look forward to the Q&A afterwards also. But I would actually like to start where you just ended on that online violence in all its forms, sexual, but also other kinds of violence, are as serious as the offline ones, because the online ones are also there. It's almost impossible sometimes to take them out, take them down, so it's being reproduced constantly, and that's something that we really need to bring along with us. And it is important that the different online platforms, those that are creating these apps, etc., are taking their share of responsibility also, as well as that us as policymakers, we act to ensure where responsibility is not taken, that it will be required and demanded. I mean, when it comes to child sexual abuse online, we see that these online platforms are not doing enough, and that's why, for example, we needed to, we still are discussing the legislation on child sexual abuse as well as the directive, even though unfortunately when it comes to the legislation it has become a big debate right now, or since many years back in the European Parliament. And it's quite interesting because when we talk about child sexual abuse online, then and that the online platforms need to be responsible for them. We need to ensure that there is accountability and if it's being done on online platforms. Then there is an argument coming up as putting the issue of integrity online against fighting child sexual abuse. I think we need to be able to do both things. We need to uphold every and each online user's integrity and privacy, as well as fighting all different violence. When we talk about organized crime, for example, very few of my colleagues in the parliament would say, no, we shouldn't fight organized crime as in mafia and, you know, different kind of organized criminal gangs, even though, of course, child sexual abuse is also organized crime, but it's being a bit differentiated. But I will come into the discussion we have in the parliament about the child sexual abuse online legislation. But just a few words about the directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence. That directive was also actually a challenge to pass through, at least as strong as strong legislation, because it was watered down in different stages. First, in the discussions in the European Parliament, we had huge discussions, and many of the points we agreed on it. We, for example, in the directive have criminalized cyber violence in the form of incitement to violence, the non-consensual sharing of intimate or manipulative material, and cyber harassment and stalking. But we had a majority for demanding in the Parliament for also including consent as a basis of all the sharings. But then the member states said, no, this is a member state competence. It cannot be a part of the directive, as well as when it comes to consent in the offline world also. So it was a huge discussion about the word consent and if it is an EU competence or not. Some said didn't want it because unfortunately 2024 and it's still 2025, there are people even in our union who believe that believe that sexual relations, not only when it comes to grown up at least, it's something between two grown-ups and nothing that politics and policies should intervene in, which I think it's a very very old mentality, and not really understanding that in relationships, when violence appears, sexual violence appears, that cannot be accepted either, and we need to act on it. But nevertheless, of course, when not allowing the consent being the basis and being included in the directive, it affects grown-ups as well as children. So that was a big fight we had, and I was a bit surprised about the unholy alliance of those who actually were constituting what is called blocking minority among the member states. It was Orban in Hungary, it was Macron in France, and Minister of Justice Buschmann in Germany, who together with some other countries also, but these were the three main countries, the big countries, who together blocked the possibility to include consent in the legislation, and also watered down in some other parts. But with this said, it is one step forward with the directive. And another point, I think our first speaker mentioned it, and that is the issue of education and training that we managed to include in it. And I think that's also important, because when it comes to this kind of violence, sometimes it's not, I mean, the images is not only shared by grown-ups, it's shared by other young people. So therefore, this kind of trainings and education needs to start on an early age, because this kind of violence also starts, the mentality of it at least starts on an early age. So that is very, very clear in the directive, but we will also follow up in 2.5 years or soon 2 years to see how it's being implemented in the different member states, and bless you. So from one directive to another directive, the other directive that I mentioned in the beginning is or legislation actually, is the child sexual abuse online legislation, what's called the CSAM regulation. When we first time discussed the CSAM regulation, it was actually the derogation back in 2020. I was surprised over the massive obstacles that appeared in the parliament, even in my own group. The rapporteur in charge of the temporary derogation was actually from in my own group, And before I got engaged in it, we saw that there was a majority against the derogation, which meant that, what was it, December 2020, if I recall it rightly, you need to double check the exact dates, December 2020, there was a privacy regulation kicking in, making some of the tools used on online platforms illegal. And if we didn't have a derogation in place, then the social media platforms would not be able to use different kind of tools to ensure that they are found. These kind of sexual abuse of children videos and pictures, etc., are being found and taken down. It was a huge debate in the parliament, but in the last minute we managed to change a majority against to a majority in favor of. When that was in place, we started directly after to talk about the derogation, which is the long-term derogation and not temporary, but the what's so-called permanent one. And on that, in my own country, in Sweden, it was starting to, during the first, the beginning of the debate, it was labeled as chat control, which started to frighten some of my colleagues, not in my party, but in some other parties. The same people who voted in favor of the derogation started to shake and started to argue against the regulation, because a massive campaign was being conducted, and the name became chat control. Even MPs from my party in Sweden called me and said, I mean, what about this legislation on chat control? And I was like, seriously, stop calling it chat control. It's not chat control. It is a legislation to prevent or to find and to take down child sexual abuse. And as soon as I explained that, people were surprised. But that showed how much money was actually put on labeling this kind of important legislations as something it was not. And once again, the privacy integrity of every online user cannot be put against the privacy and integrity of a child. Because in the end, it's also privacy of integrity of a child when needed to see your naked pictures and videos being spread all around the world. Because we know social media platforms, online platforms, doesn't see any borders. But our legislations seem to see any borders. Our actions seem to see any borders. We need to also, policy-wise, start to understand that these kind of crimes, which they are, and they should also be treated as, has a huge consequences for children. Even when they come up to grown-up age, it has huge consequences, because it's there, and it's very hard to take them down. I also just want to say that one thing that I got very furious about is when Trump got elected, we started to see online platforms, as for example Meta, cut down on employees whose responsibility is to find criminal offenses on their online platforms, or disinformation and misinformation also for that sake, which means that the online platforms are not taking their share of responsibility, and it's our responsibility as legislator to make them do what they should have done without us intervening. And finally, just some words about the AI Act, which is also an important act to mention. AI Act actually divides different kind of AI in harmful, less harmful, and not harmful at all, basically, to summarize it. This kind of tools should be, at least from my perspective, seen very harmful or and should be prohibited, because at least when it comes to those that are focusing on reproducing child sexual abuse, even if it's a real child or if it's not a real child, what it does, it's contributing to a rape culture. And that, if something, is very harmful, because what you don't see happen to real child will be happening to a not real child, and when that's being normalized, it will go from not being real to the real life also. So it starts from, but this is not a real child, to, if let's try it also in the real life. So I think we have some tools. It's also, we are going to, of course, from the European Parliament to follow and see how they are being implemented. And then it's our responsibility to see where there is no implementation and the implementation is not right. We need to ensure that the legislation are as thorough as possible, and that there is no space where a child can be abused online or offline without any accountability. And yeah, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I should warn you, this is also a privacy crowd here, so we might get some responses because encryption and end-to-end encryption, and those are vivid debates we have in parallel sessions somewhere in this conference. But this is certainly a debate that we want to have, to hear all sides of arguments. So now to our last speaker, Kim Barker. I already introduced you, so I'm looking forward to hearing a more critical point of view, maybe.
Thank you. So criticism I can absolutely do. Cynicism I will also offer. But I'm going to start on 2 points that you mentioned. I think one that we don't talk about enough is culture. We can expect the law to do great things. We've got loads of different potential bits of law that can be helpful now. The AI Act is one, although I'm a massive cynic. The DSA is another. I'm a fairly big cynic as to how effective they will be. They're fine. They're a great starting point, but they don't address the cultural problem we've got. And that cultural problem is not just kids on smartphones or people in Ghana, to pick an example that's been mentioned already. It's everywhere. Like, we've all got smartphones. We all know what we're doing. There is a cultural tendency now to just pick up a phone and do something on a phone. Whether that is illegal or not is a question for later. The default norm is pick up a phone and do something on a phone, or get a tablet out and do something on a tablet. And that is a default principle, and the harms that we can perpetuate through that are deeply embedded in the norm that we have of picking up phones and engaging in technologies. That's not to say I'm advocating for smartphone bans in classrooms, for example, because I think that's fraught with different dangers. But there are a whole host of issues with the way that we engage with technology and the way that we assume technology is the answer to everything. I think the second part of this, and it's also cultural, is the culture of the platforms, the things that they allow us to do. There is a huge suggestion that safety by design needs to be at the core of everything these platforms and spaces and providers are offering. And there is potential there for that to have a real-world impact, to improve lives of children, boys and girls, in particular online. But that also requires responsibility from the platforms and the spaces and the providers. They offer a service. I'm going to say they actually offer a product, all of them individually. And so when we think about cars, when we think about planes, when we think about trains, when we think about domestic appliances, there are inbuilt requirements for safety in those, but we don't necessarily talk about the same level of safety expectations when it comes to platforms and spaces. And I think there is a lot there that we could and perhaps should be thinking about in the age of AI in particular, in what we are allowing to be designed into a platform or a space. The virtual reality aspect, I think, is one of those where inbuilt design safety is going to be something we need to think more about. I think the third aspect of this is also the signals that are sent from those in power. I'm not going to pick on a particular state or particular leader at this point in time, but the way in which the messages are sent from those leaders in their political campaigns, in their platforms, whether they are private or otherwise, send huge messages to the people that we're talking about protecting in the context of what we do online and not. The lack of respect, the cultural ability to be abusive, insulting, offensive, to use deepfakes to make a point, to belittle an opponent, for instance, all of those things feed into this culture that we have of abusive, potentially illegal and absolutely harmful content that's generated through technology, be it smartphones or tablets or whatever it is. So there's a huge cultural side to all of this, which is, I think, a particular challenge, and none of the legislation captures that. How do you capture a cultural or social challenge in legislation? The other flip side of that, of course, is where we have good potential legislation, it's watered down for political purposes. I'll give one anecdote without breaking Chatham House rules. There have been discussions at Council of Europe level recently about how we deal with tech-facilitated violence. Some member states that have been particularly proactive in domestic laws in terms of what they're trying to do to provide safer online spaces wanted a lot of the draft text walking back because they thought it would go against their domestic provisions, and they weren't interested in taking additional steps given what they already had in place. And that was from a particularly progressive state that was interested in online safety. So I think there are also some real political tensions around how we address any element of cyber violence. Whether we can do this in terms of legislation is one question. Whether that legislation is then implemented and enforced in the right way is a second question. And the legislation will only ever be as good as the implementation and enforcement in the background. And sometimes when we talk about the granular details of legislative provisions, we forget that the people we're trying to protect are the kids online or the women in public life, whatever it might be. Sometimes we need to remember what it is we're dealing with rather than putting the granular details of law first and foremost. And then I think the other thing, which is a real challenge when we talk about any of this, is that actually all of this creates trauma. If you're abused online, if there are images of you out there, it's almost impossible to get them taken down in every form. They're spread, they're shared. If they're publicly available, you can almost bet with a fair degree of certainty that they've been privately shared as well. So removing the public version doesn't solve the problem. They'll be there somewhere in cyberspace waiting to come back and haunt you at a future point in time. That will create additional trauma, even if you've moved on, there's been legal enforcement, whatever it might be. So that is a future problem which is building up in the background that we are in no way good at addressing at this point in time. Beyond that, when we're dealing with this, assuming it gets to the point of prosecution, there is also the need for a trauma-informed approach to this when it comes to prosecution and investigation. And I don't think every platform is particularly good at being cooperative when it comes to that. I don't think every prosecutor or prosecutorial authority is particularly good at that either. There are some fair horror stories from investigative bodies as to how this kind of stuff goes wrong. Can we share images when they're in case files? Can we hand it over to both parties because they're indecent images? Should we be doing that? Some of the questions and comments from some judges that are sitting in these cases. So I think that in itself also suggests there is work to be done in the context of how we take this kind of stuff forward and address it. So those are my kind of headline cynical points, not having to go at prosecutors, but there is a lot of room for improvement, I think. I think the other things to bear in mind, we have legislation. We've heard a bit about the DSA, we've heard a bit about the AI Act, heard a lot about the directive. The directive is great. It's a starting point. My cynicism is it's only a directive, and so there are lots of potential ways for states to water that down when it comes to implementing domestically. The other flip side of that is great that we've got express recognition of some forms of cyber violence in that directive, but there are some forms which aren't going to be captured in the right way, which aren't necessarily going to address some of the problems we're starting to see with the uses of technology. And the other side of that, with a very doctrinal lawyer's hat on, is the directive text is great when that's transposed into member states' domestic criminal provisions. There is going to be a lot of blurred lines around what might be cyber violence in the directive and how that translates into criminal offences at state level. The cynic in me says some states will just skim over parts which are tricky or which might roughly fit with what they've already got, particularly if they're not that interested in addressing cyber violence. And then the other side of this is the DSA, in theory, is great. It's a great starting point. Again, it needs really good enforcement and implementation. If done in the right way, we can address lots of the issues with AI imagery, child sexual abuse material, etc. through that. But again, the platforms are the outlier in this. The platforms have got to take responsibility, the enforcement has got to be right. And really, I guess my challenge is, why has it taken us so long to get to this point where we're thinking about making platforms responsible for what they're doing? They've had a very free run for a very long time without any real degree of law enforcement or oversight. And I still don't think we're as rigorous as we might want to be with them. A lot of the choices, as I've already said, are design choices. They allow us to do things. Just because the tech is there to allow us to do things doesn't mean we should do it. Doesn't mean we should have the ability to do it. Doesn't mean that platforms should let us do it. How we address that, whether from law or culture or something else, is a different issue. And then I think the flip side of all of this, that's been mentioned a little bit, is the need for education and training. And that is at every level. That's not just for teachers to deal with in schools, because I'm not sure it's fair to ask teachers to try and teach kids about AI and deepfakes and what they should and shouldn't be doing. I think that presents all sorts of additional risks. But if we're not doing it through schools, at what point are we doing it? Is there space here for platforms to take a leading role? Should there be some kind of platform-led initiative on what is safe and not safe online? Maybe, but again, that's fraught with risks. So there is an education question. The challenges of AI aren't going away. I think the other thing we need to be mindful of is what if we do with law will take a very long time. So DSA has taken a very long time to get to where we are. The directive has taken a very long time. Technology is evolving. The law will never keep up. It will never be on top of this. Prosecutions take a long time from start to finish. And that's assuming you can get the evidence, assuming that it does meet the threshold for prosecution, assuming it makes it to court without any issues. That doesn't necessarily provide redress for the people that have been affected by the online abuse, by the child sexual exploitation, whatever it might be. So I don't think we're great at supporting victims. I don't think we're great at educating children about what they should and shouldn't be doing, or parents, or teachers, but that's not necessarily a teacher's problem. Judges, prosecutors, investigators also, I think, need a bit more training in this, and that requires resource. We know that in several states, particularly within Europe, there are lots of financial issues and economical issues at the minute, so resource is a question. All roads, in my opinion, lead back to the platforms, who seem to have almost limitless resource when they want to spend it and use it in the right way. But how do we make the most of that to address the challenges that we're beginning to see come to fruition, particularly where they are harmful and damagingly harmful for future generations? I suspect that's probably enough cynicism, but I'm quite happy to offer more, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. We cannot get enough of your critical comments. I'm fascinated by the way you present them. Okay, so I would like to thank our panelists for the first intervention, and because of the time constraints, we have 15 minutes until the panel ends. So I would open the floor for questions. If you have a question, you come here to the spotlight. There's a microphone because of the recording of the session. Are there any questions?
Can I answer?
Yes. Sorry, yes.
I basically wanted to add to some of the criticisms, and it's really, I mean, it's such a concern which I really share, how very well-intended legislation can be weaponized. So we had the DSA coming in, really to, you know, we use it a lot actually, also for takedown of harmful content. Most of it's CSAM, non-consensual intimate images, deep nudes, etc. Because I think that's, I mean, there's several lessons we've learned in Belgium, because we were a little bit at the vanguard of all this kind of legislation, and we changed it several times, and we were lucky that our legislators were open to evidence-based legislation. So as a prosecutor, I have by law with cyber violence, two functions, and one is of course investigate, prosecute, blah, 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 but the other one is take down. So I also have this obligation to take down images if I can. And unfortunately, what we've seen is, because so now we use also the DSA, we make reference to the DSA, because in the DSA there is this takedown obligation for platforms. And what we've seen is that several of the platforms, it's now more difficult for us sometimes to get cooperation for takedown, because they weaponize the DSA against us. They send our requests back and they say, oh, but in conformity with the DSA, you also need to provide this and this and this. And you need to provide extra evidence that, you know, images that are clearly CSAM, that they are CSAM, etc. And you need to provide, and a lot of it is nonsense, is really nonsense, and, you know, I can disprove that. But it's also because I'm one of the prosecutors that is designated on this topic and who has, you know, also worked on DSA, etc. But for a lot of my colleagues, prosecutors, if they get this back, and given the workload that we have, they will not push forward. And that's just very sad to see how, you know, how this kind of well-intended legislation by these companies have been weaponized. And I think what has been disheartening for us really is, and I'll come to a positive point, but disheartening is so many of us have spent so much of our free time, really free time, evenings, weekends, taking off, to actually support some of these mega companies, tech companies, to improve their standards, to develop more the AI to take down, to tackle cyber violence. And most of that, the moment they saw the opportunity now with a new administration in the US, just, you know, they just dumped that. And they're not doing that anymore. And what I feel is really necessary, given, and it's in the directive as well, but was really necessary is also to have our European homegrown solutions. Now for CSAM, we are much dependent on an American, I mean, very good center, NECMEC, and they give us the reports from the tech companies on CSAM for takedown. We need our own European center based on our own European solutions and our own, you know, perspective on that. I really think that is necessary to do so, and to have these centers for cyber violence here within our own framework is essential. And just as a reminder, only yesterday Microsoft turned off all the tech on the ICC, and that shows you how vulnerable we made ourselves of some companies. And it should be on the basis of our own rules and how we created that. You know, I really believe in the European framework, with all the cynicism how it doesn't work, but the principles that are there, I really believe that we can create better in Europe, better solutions that have this, you know, security versus privacy, you know, much debated, much evidence-based. And I really think we need that to focus on this. We've given too much away from our ability to scrutinize, to examine, to prosecute, to take down to some companies. And I think we need to shift that power back to Europe. And that's indeed not just the law, that's also culture, but that's also investing in academia and tech here to develop our own solutions.
Thank you.
No, but just on the points that you raised, and those are actually the points that we were fighting for within the regulation on fighting child sexual abuse online, the CSAM regulation, to have a center. And to ensure that the online platforms are obliged to. And that was actually two of the most controversial points. I do not understand how a center could be controversial. It shouldn't be. And how it could be controversial to ensure that the online platforms are obliged, even though, of course, it's controversial for the online platforms, because that would require them to step up their work and not do what exactly you said. After Trump was elected, as I mentioned before, even Meta went up and said that we will cut down on staff who are monitoring. That shows also that it will have effect. That says it per se, that it will have effect on all of the debate that discussions that we have had and we are having right now. But, and when it comes to the directives, I fully subscribe to what you said, and it's correct. When it comes to the directive, it's up for interpretation for the member states, and then, but they would need to also show, be accountable to the Commission when the follow-up is, or when we will have an evaluation after 3 years of the implementation, if they have implemented it correctly. So during the process of negotiating the directive on violence against women and domestic violence, we try to be so concrete as possible in the legislation to ensure that there is so little space for interpretation as possible. And as a legislator is always combat to ensure that the legislation is written as well as possible, with as little interpretation as possible, but at the same time that it actually have the effect that there is an intention for. What you mentioned on how the online platforms are acting, I mean, some of those actions, it's hard to, in advance, know that they will act like this up on that and that part of the legislation. We see it after the implementations are taking place. But I guess that's always how regulations and laws goes. But I also just want to finalize with saying that it will always, unfortunately, with the digital age that we're living in, policy will always be not one step behind, many steps behind, but the question is how many steps behind we will be, because technology is changing from hour to hour, not even day by day, hour to hour, while legislation takes longer time to produce.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. And I think with the DSA, we saw that once the pornographic sites were designated as very large online platforms, they started reporting less users, right? So that they fall under the threshold. So you can come up with all kinds of criteria, but creative compliance is always a problem in every digital law. Yes. I would ask Maria and Kim if you would like to make a final comment, because we're close to ending, if there's no question from the audience still. No? Yes.
Maybe just a very short final comment to focus on prevention, because we've heard the trauma is long-lasting. It goes until adulthood. It haunts you all your life, as Kim was saying. So this is something that we want to champion at the Council of Europe, and prevention through age-appropriate, comprehensive sexuality education. And I mean, we are drafting a recommendation for guidance to member states on how comprehensive sexuality education should be delivered in terms of content, program, monitoring, accountability. So hopefully this will be adopted soon. We already have a feasibility study on this topic that actually takes a child rights approach, saying that comprehensive sexuality education is needed to protect a cluster of human rights. And this includes the right to life, the right to education, security, and to have a life free from violence. So I really much focus on prevention also to alleviate the workload of law enforcement, prosecuting, etc. Thank you.
I'll end with not cynicism. I think it's important to acknowledge, despite the challenges we've still got, just how far we've come. We've got recognition in law, for once, that cyberviolence is real, that there is prolonged harm, that we should do something about it. We've got recognition in law that platforms should be more responsible, that have to act, have to deal with content. How well they do it is a moot point, but there is legislation there. Prosecutors are acting, the workloads are horrendous, we know that. The scale and the phenomenon of cyberviolence, AI challenges, child sexual exploitation is huge. We can't really conceptualize how huge that is, but we are making progress. Council of Europe is doing great stuff in order to try and address some of the problems. The European Union is doing good stuff. We just need to do more of it, and we need to ensure that platforms do not wriggle and get let off the hook. So it's really about education and enforcement and making sure that those two things go hand in hand. And in the background, all of the other policy things like safety by design, like deliberative design choices, like a different cultural shift. We've come this far. We're at a good place in terms of the law. We just need to go further and do more. Do not stop is my message.
Great, thank you. So I would like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for this wonderful discussion and presentations. So thank you very much.